Most infidelity jobs are boring. People imagine private investigation as high-speed chases and hidden conspiracies, but most of it is sitting in parked cars, drinking cold coffee while someone cheats exactly the way you expected them to. This case felt normal at first. A woman hired me to track her husband because he'd started disappearing late at night. No explanations, no receipts, no calls answered after midnight. She wanted proof. That's all. So I did what I always do. I placed a magnetic GPS tracker beneath his SUV while it sat outside his office and monitored the signal remotely from my laptop. For 3 nights, his routine stayed predictable. Work, bar, home. Then came Thursday. At 1:47 a.m., the tracker pinged somewhere unusual. A remote state park nearly 40 miles outside town. No campground nearby, no cabins, just miles of forest and old service roads. I assumed he was meeting someone privately, maybe drugs, maybe another woman. At 2:13 a.m., the signal stopped moving. I zoomed in on the map. The SUV sat in a gravel turnout deep inside the park, far beyond the main roads. No nearby buildings, no lights, just trees. Something about it bothered me immediately. People hiding affairs don't usually drive into wilderness at 2 in the morning, but I needed visual confirmation. So I drove out there. The deeper I got into the park, the worse the air felt. Heavy fog drifted low across the road, thick enough to swallow my headlights. The forest around me looked unnaturally dense, branches crowding together like they were leaning inward. No wildlife sounds, no insects, nothing. Then I found the turnout. The SUV sat exactly where the tracker said it would. Engine off, driver's door hanging open, empty. I parked about 30 yards back and cued my lights. For a moment I just listened. The woods were dead silent, not natural silence, pressure silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The gravel crunched too loudly beneath my shoes. The SUV looked abandoned, keys still inside, wallet on the passenger seat, phone sitting in the cup holder. No blood, no signs of struggle, just empty. I remember calling out once, "Sir?" No response. Then my laptop started glitching inside the car behind me. The screen flickered violently. Static tore across the map display. At first, I thought I'd lost signal in the woods. Then I saw the coordinates moving, fast. Not along roads, not randomly. The tracker icon spiraled outward from the SUV in perfect geometric loops deeper into the forest where no paths existed. My chest tightened. The spirals expanded rapidly, mathematically precise, like something drawing symbols across the map. The tracker wasn't traveling normally. It was moving through the woods impossibly fast and getting farther away every second. Then the laptop speakers crackled. A burst of static erupted loud enough to make me jump. Beneath it, breathing, heavy, wet, followed by a voice, my own voice, whispering coordinates. Not the tracker's coordinates, mine. The exact location where I stood beside the SUV. Cold sweat rolled down my neck. I backed away immediately, and that's when I noticed the trees. They weren't still anymore. Deep in the darkness beyond the turnout, dozens of silhouettes stood silently between the trunks, too tall, too thin, perfectly motionless, watching. My flashlight trembled in my grip. One of them moved sideways impossibly fast without taking a step. That was enough for me. I got in my car and left. I didn't stop driving until sunrise. 3 days later, the husband turned up, wandering barefoot along a highway nearly 70 miles away. Dehydrated, confused, no memory of where he'd been. Doctors assumed exposure and psychological shock. He kept repeating one sentence over and over during questioning. They kept trying to map me. The police recovered his SUV later that week. The GPS tracker had been melted into the undercarriage, not burned, melted, like exposed to impossible heat from the inside. I never told the client everything I saw, just that her husband probably wasn't cheating. But sometimes, late at night, my old investigation laptop still powers itself on. The screen flickers, static floods the speakers, and for a few seconds I see those geometric spirals drawing themselves outward into the woods again, expanding, searching, like something out there is still trying to calculate the exact route back to me. Most paranoia cases end the same way. An elderly client calls convinced someone is entering their home at night, moving objects, stealing meaningless things. Usually it's dementia, forgetfulness, family disputes spiraling into obsession. That's what I assumed when Mrs. Alden hired me. She was 78, widowed, and lived alone in a narrow little house at the end of a quiet suburban street. The place smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Every room was spotless, too spotless. "My son's been coming in," she told me during our first meeting. Her hands trembled around a teacup. "He takes little things, things he knows I'll notice." "What kind of things?" "Photographs, jewelry, silver spoons from the dining room." She swallowed hard. "And sometimes the cat acts like someone else is here." I asked about the son. Estranged for nearly 10 years, history of addiction, petty theft, easy explanation. But something about the woman unsettled me. Not because she seemed unstable, because she seemed embarrassed, like she already knew how unbelievable it sounded. So I agreed to set up cameras, mostly to reassure her. I installed motion-activated cameras throughout the house, living room, hallway, kitchen. Nothing unusual happened the first 2 nights. No movement, no break-ins. Then at 7:12 the following morning, I got a motion alert from the living room camera, time-stamped 3:15 a.m. I opened the footage, expecting to see the sun. Instead, I watched the floor vent move, very slowly. At first, it barely shifted, just enough to make me lean closer to the screen. Then the grate lifted upward from beneath. A hand emerged through the darkness below, filthy, skeletal, fingers so thin they looked jointed like spider legs. My stomach tightened. The hand pulled the vent aside carefully, and then the man crawled out into the room. I still remember the way he moved, not like someone climbing, like something unfolding. His body was horrifyingly thin, skin stretched tight against bone beneath layers of dirt-darkened clothing. Long, greasy hair hung across his face in wet strands. The duct opening couldn't have been wider than 14 inches, but he squeezed through it anyway, slowly, silently. My skin crawled watching him emerge into the room. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily through his mouth while staring into the darkness of the house. Then he walked to the sofa. The cat jumped onto his lap immediately, like it knew him. The man sat there for 45 minutes, just petting it, slowly, methodically, never speaking, never looking at the camera. At one point, he glanced toward the hallway where Mrs. Alden slept and smiled, not maliciously, almost sadly. Then he stood up, crawled back toward the vent, and disappeared into the floor, before closing the grate behind him perfectly. I called the police immediately. We returned that afternoon with officers and construction workers. Mrs. Alden cried when they told her someone had truly been inside the house, but the worst part came when they opened the crawl space beneath the floorboards. He had been living there for nearly 6 months. There were blankets, food wrappers, bottles of water, stacks of stolen photographs, and dozens of small items carefully arranged in rows like keepsakes, silver spoons, hairbrushes, old birthday cards, things too personal to be random. The officers searched the crawl space for hours, but they never found him. Only signs he'd been there, fresh signs. One officer eventually asked Mrs. Alden if she recognized the man from the footage. She stared at the screen for a very long time before answering. Then she whispered something that made every person in that room go completely silent. "That isn't my son," she said. Her voice shook violently. "That's the man who built this house." The room turned cold around me, because the house was built in 1961, and when police checked the records later that evening, the builder she named went missing during construction, without a trace, 64 years ago. I quit using motion cameras after that case, but sometimes when reviewing footage late at night, I still catch myself staring too long at dark corners and floor vents, waiting, because ever since that investigation, I can't shake the feeling that houses don't always stay empty just because you lock the doors. Sometimes something is already living inside the walls, quietly learning your routines, waiting for you to fall asleep before it comes up to sit in your living room. Insurance fraud surveillance is mind-numbing work. Most of the time you sit in a parked car for 12 hours hoping to catch someone lifting a heavy box after claiming a back injury. That was the assignment. A middle-aged man collecting disability checks while allegedly renovating his own house on the weekends. Simple, boring, the kind of case you can do half asleep after 20 years in investigations. By the 4th night, I knew the neighborhood better than some of the residents did. Quiet suburban block, trim lawns, motion lights, dogs barking at the same times every evening. I parked my surveillance van 3 houses down from the target's home with a clear line of sight to the driveway. No one knew my exact location, not my client, not my agency. I picked stakeout spots randomly to avoid detection. That mattered later. At around 1 a.m., I noticed headlights turning onto the street behind me. A dark sedan, slow moving. It rolled past my van, then parked 3 houses back near the curb. The headlights shut off immediately. I waited. No doors opened. Nobody got out. I remember staring at the rearview mirror for nearly 10 minutes, expecting movement. Nothing. Eventually, I assumed it belonged to a neighbor and went back to documenting the target's house. The sedan left sometime around 3 a.m. I barely thought about it afterward, until it returned the next night. Same time, same spot, lights off, no movement. That's when my instincts started bothering me. Experienced investigators develop a sense for surveillance, tiny things, timing, positioning, stillness, and that car felt wrong. I decided to get a better look. I kept a high-powered camera with a telescopic lens in the van for long-distance documentation. Around 1:20 a.m., I mounted it carefully against the dashboard and zoomed in on the sedan's windshield. At first, I saw only darkness. Then the image adjusted, and I saw the driver, sitting perfectly motionless behind a wheel, facing directly toward my van. Night vision goggles covered their face, not scanning the neighborhood, not watching the target house, watching me. A cold pulse moved through my stomach. I lowered the camera immediately and checked my mirrors instinctively, suddenly aware of how exposed I was sitting there. The driver never moved, just sat there in complete darkness with those goggles pointed directly at me. That's when the realization hit. Nobody should have known where I was parked. I hadn't logged the location with dispatch, hadn't texted anyone, hadn't even used my usual routes, which meant one thing. They weren't tracking the target, they were tracking me. My mouth went dry. I checked the street again. The sedan remained completely still. No interior lights, no cigarette glow, nothing. Just a dark shape pointed toward my van, like it had been waiting for me specifically. I reached slowly beneath the seat for the pistol I legally carried during field work. The metal felt ice cold in my hand. Then I made a mistake. I started the engine. The van rumbled to life. Instantly, the sedan reversed hard down the street. Fast, too fast. No brake lights, no headlights. Just black movement swallowing distance unnaturally quick. Tires hissed softly against pavement as it backed nearly half a block before spinning around the corner and disappearing completely into the night. Dark, silent, gone. I drove the area for nearly an hour afterward, never found it. No traffic cameras caught it either. No plates, nothing. I returned home before sunrise, feeling more unsettled than I'd been in years. But the worst part came later. I reviewed my surveillance notes the next morning and noticed something I'd missed. The sedan had been there the first night, too. Not parked behind me, farther away, barely visible at the end of the street in one of my time-stamped reference photos. Watching. Every night it had moved closer. I dug deeper after that, checked old case files, client histories, former subjects, trying to figure out who would surveil an investigator so carefully. I found nothing, no threats, no enemies serious enough for this. Then,
3 nights later, I stepped out of a grocery store after midnight and found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath my windshield wiper. No fingerprints, no handwriting, just a printed photograph taken through the windshield of my surveillance van. Me sitting inside, looking directly into the camera. The timestamp showed it had been taken before I first noticed the sedan, and scrawled beneath the image in tiny typed letters were 5 words that still keep me awake at night.